Hello, I'm Laxmi Gopal. Welcome to the Daily Global, where we'll bring you the top stories from around the world. In the past few hours, the UN Security Council has adopted a resolution on Gaza after days of negotiations. It doesn't call for a ceasefire and leaves Israel in control of monitoring aid deliveries. But the United Arab Emirates, which sponsored the resolution, says it can make a real difference for Palestinian civilians. The United States and Russia were the only two members of the Security Council to abstain. The United States ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, spoke after the resolution was passed. Have a listen to what she had to say.
It took many days and many long nights of negotiating to get this right. But today, this council provided a glimmer of hope amongst a sea of unimaginable suffering. Today, this council called for urgent steps to immediately allow safe, unhindered, and expanded humanitarian access, and to create the conditions for a sustainable cessation of hostilities.
That was the US ambassador to the UN. Well, the UN Secretary General, António Guterres, also spoke after the resolution was passed, and he says despite the diplomatic pressure, nothing seems to be changing in Gaza.
Over the last weeks and days, there has been no significant change in the way the war has been unfolding in Gaza. There is no effective protection of civilians. Intense Israeli bombardment and ground operations continue. More than 20,000 Palestinians have reportedly been killed, the vast majority women and children. Meanwhile, Hamas and other Palestinian factions continue to fire rockets from Gaza into Israel.
Well, the UK ambassador to the UN emphasised how the resolution should help aid supplies to Gaza.
And today, we supported this resolution, which will streamline aid checks so we can massively scale up the humanitarian response. It demands the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and it calls for steps towards a sustainable cessation of hostilities. And for the avoidance of doubt, we are clear that the resolution is without prejudice to the rights and obligations of parties under international humanitarian law.
That was the UK ambassador to the UN. Well, our UN correspondent, Neda Tawfiq, is in New York with more.
The United States explained in the Council that ultimately while they were happy that this was stepping up humanitarian aid, they were not happy that the Council did not include a condemnation of Hamas for the October 7th attack. And she said that is what led them to eventually abstain. Now, it is worth noting that the draft was humanitarian in nature, and those on the Council who have discussed this resolution said there must be a condemnation of all parties if one is named. And so ultimately, the United States, while it did say that, didn't use its veto to block this draft. And that came after just intense negotiations, really at the highest level in capitals, to try to reach an agreement. And as we heard from the Secretary General today, he says that there shouldn't be a judgment about the aid and how much is getting in by the number of trucks that are at the borders crossing into Gaza. He said that there is a real problem with the way Israel is conducting its military operation. Again, these kind of international calls for a ceasefire are growing so loudly. And while the UAE did kind of defend this resolution, she did acknowledge, the ambassador Lana Nsebe, that it is not perfect and that they will continue to push for a ceasefire.
And Nada, the language that was changed in order for this to go through refers to a ceasefire in terms of creating conditions for a ceasefire. That's what this meant. Is that too vague to be meaningful?
That's what a lot of critics argue. We saw, for example, real divides in the Arab group of nations. Jordan, Algeria, members taking their name off sponsoring this resolution because they thought it was just watered down too much, that it really made no impact. They said it would be better not to have a resolution at all rather than to have this one. But again, some saying, given the dynamics on the ground, given the United States is still against a ceasefire, it was better to kind of work within the parameters they could to get some stronger, a Security Council resolution that would give some push to diplomacy to get more aid in, rather than to have nothing. So there is a bit of disagreement about this resolution, but what we heard from a number of members in the Council was that its effectiveness will be judged in the coming weeks on how much it actually does change the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza.
That was our UN correspondent, Neda Tawfiq.